Hey guys, my name's Tara. I am one of the Matcher resident ambassadors here to chat to you on a live today. And I am going to add in one of our lovely ambassadors, Monica, who is going to be joining me. There we go. Welcome, welcome.
Hi,
Hi.
how are you doing?
I'm good. It's very nice to meet you.
Likewise.
So, since kind of everyone's logging on, we'll give everyone a minute to get here, and then Monica and I will introduce ourselves so you guys know a little bit about who we are.
You can go ahead first.
Well, since everyone's kind of joining in, I'll introduce myself. So my name is Tara. I am a fourth year medical student at the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland, and I am applying this cycle as part of the 2021-2022 match cycle in pediatrics. You can find me over on my personal Instagram page at Tara Jamieson Music or over on my YouTube channel by searching Tara Jamieson.
That's nice. We need more peds.
I love peds. I'm a little biased though. I think it's the best specialty.
You can take care of my kids. So my name is Monica. I am a graduate from Universidad Autónoma de Guadalajara. I graduated in December 2020. I had applied to the match last year, and for some reason, my application got disqualified, withdrawn, because some paperwork didn't get on time. And I'm reapplying this cycle to anesthesiology.
And you can find her at her Instagram handle.
Correct.
We thought we would kind of go over a few things that we've experienced. So, Monica, I kind of wanted to ask you, kind of applying in anesthesiology this year, what was your interview experience like?
So it was good for the programs I interview with, but being realistic, I will always be part of the group that's gonna be on the low side of interviews. But either way, I'm always very optimistic and hopeful that I always say you only need one. And so far it was okay. Nervous. I don't know what to expect. I think that's pretty much how I sum it up. How was yours?
It was good. I guess this was my first time kind of going through the whole process, so I didn't really know what to expect. And especially because PEDS, from what I'd heard from kind of talks throughout the summer, was trying to aim for more holistic applications. I didn't know what that was going to look like. So for me, I kind of hoped for the best, but expected the worst. And I think I kind of ended up in a middle ground. So that was kind of there was a few triumphs. Like I got a couple of like dream interviews for me, and then there were a few letdowns, places, where I really thought I'd be a really good fit, and then just it didn't end up working out. So I think there's always kind of that push and pull through interview season. Did you find any of that yourself?
Yes, actually, I got a interview from one of my dream programs, and I never thought that they were gonna call me. But the second one, I was really hoping for. I got that rejection. I was like, no. I'm like, I really wanted you. So I totally understand that.
From what I've heard from my friends who are also applying this cycle, that was something that we all were really kind of experiencing as a collective.
Yeah, I mean, I always say never shoot yourself short and always try, and you never know what could happen.
Things that you learned through the interview process, anything that you thought kind of really benefited you, or anything that you would have done differently?
So being the second time around, I always tell people it's never too early to start preparing for this process. It is long, it is draining, but at the end it's worth it. But start early. Don't wait until last minute. If you are MS2, that doesn't matter. You can start preparing because this, I mean, I'm serious. This takes a toll on you.
Would agree. It's definitely both I would say, physically and mentally challenging process.
Oh, for
Because
sure.
even with the virtual interviews, you have to make sure your setup is right. There's so much more that's going into your kind of interview presentation, I guess, now.
Yeah.
I know Match a Resident has a few videos on their Instagram and their YouTube channel about different interview tips that people had. I think something that always worked for me was I tend to get really relaxed if I like have a little dance party before I have my interview. So I'd like play my favorite song, jam out for 3 minutes, and then go into my interview feeling like really confident.
That's a good idea. I get really nervous the day before and I just start pacing around. And I think that helps at the long run, but yeah, I'm always, oh my God, I want to throw up. That's
Yeah, it's an extremely nerve-wracking process. I remember going into the first interview not really knowing what to expect. And it was really like, I have no idea what's going to happen. And it ended up being really conversational. I don't know if anesthesia interviews were like that. I found most of the PEDS ones to be really kind of getting to know you, really conversational type interviews.
so for the programs I had, because I can't speak for all of them, they were very, very conversational. They really wanted to get to know you because they're like, everything academic, I already saw it on your app. I want to know about you as a person, like outside of medicine. And I think that was pretty good and interesting. It will make you calm down a little bit, you know. But some programs I've heard they were like very academic stuff or like weird questions. And I'm like, I'm so grateful that that wasn't me.
I had one or two that were kind of more MMI style, where you had like 6 interviews that were 10 minutes long and they had one question each. But I would say the majority were very like conversational, wanted to get to know you. And I think that's something hopefully that we'll see moving forward, because really to find the best fit for you, it's really important that you get to know the program as well.
Yes.
Questions that you consistently asked your programs that kind of helped kind of as we're going into rank season?
So I think one of my top questions I was always asking is how do they support us as women in medicine to get into leadership positions? And I think that was my question for all the programs I constantly asked, and they were good at answering. Hopefully, they're the same in the programs as well in person. But yeah, what was yours?
The question that I consistently asked was, what's something about your program that we can't really get from this kind of virtual, I called it the Zoomiverse because so there was so much that happened on Zoom. And I would ask the question of residents and like the resident meet and greets, and then I would ask the questions of program directors, and I would get very different responses. And it was always really interesting to see what the residents valued and what the residents thought we couldn't really get from this virtual environment, and then what the program directors thought and what the program directors really thought we were missing from the virtual environment.
That's actually a good one. That is really good.
That was kind of my approach. I guess now that have you finished all of your interviews, or do you still have more coming up?
Yes, I finished all my interviews already.
So now that interview season is over, how are you feeling?
Oh my God, nauseous. I can't even think about it. Like, I'm feeling hopeful as always, but I gotta keep busy to keep my mind off it because if not, I'm gonna go crazy. Some days I think, yes, I'm gonna match, and then the other day I'm like, oh my God, what if I don't? So I just try to keep busy and try to help people and talk about it as well. Um, how do you spend your days?
Still in my kind of MS4 year, so I'm still going to class. I'm still kind of preparing for my final exams at the end of the year. I think one of the feelings that I've really been having is kind of this back and forth of like I've been thinking about my rank list throughout interview season, and now that we're finally here, I'm both relieved that I'm not, sitting in front of a camera doing kind of all these interviews and having the stress of that going on, but then there's this new stress, this new nervousness, but also excitement that's come in with kind of anticipating the match. It's almost like I kind of just want it to be here. I kind of just want to know by now.
Yes.
I guess, how have you approached like kind of moving through interview season? You're asking those questions throughout your interviews, and how is that impacting you making your rank list?
So for me, number one is location. Location and how good of a fit you will be in that program. But I think location is still number one because I will not survive in a cold temperature. I will just flat out die. I will not make it to work. That's my number one. And then the other one is always if you're a good fit for the program and if you think you're gonna get along very well with your co-residents, because it's very important to get along because it's a teamwork. You cannot do it alone. What about you?
So I'm seeing a few questions pop in the chat. Keep popping the questions in. We're gonna have a little bit of a chit chat, Monica and I, and then we're gonna go through and answer all of your questions, give you guys a chance to kind of ask us about our feelings and our experiences. But as far as making my rank list was concerned, I kept notes from every interview. I had like a sticky note system where I'd like put them all up, and then the sticky note would go up and the sticky note would go down, and one thing that I found really useful was the Match a Resident rank list feature. So I used the interview manager as I got interviews, kind of plugged them in so I could keep track of when they were. But then on top of that is, as I would have interviews, I'd use kind of that standardized questionnaire. And what I found is that the answers that I put in really did kind of align with where I was thinking places would go. Now, things didn't always align kind of as I've made my final rank list. But I think the important things for me were location, but probably for a different reason. It was, for me, proximity to an airport so that I'm from Canada, I'm not American, even though I have a North American accent. So I want to make sure that I can get back to Canada. I can go and see my family. The other things that were important to me were kind of if I was a good fit for the program, if I kind of meshed well with the residents. And then things that mattered to me were, because at the time I was thinking about couples matching, my partner and I have now decided to uncouple, and we'll just have a long distance relationship for the remainder of residency. But at the time, there was also kind of that couples consideration. Did my partner also get an interview here? So there were a few different things that went into my interviews and into my initial rank list. Now it's mostly location and whether or not I'd be a good fit.
And that's very important too. The couples match, that's a whole different world too.
Yeah, it's a whirlwind and it's really challenging. And I can understand, like, you've been in medical school, you've made this great connection with somebody else, and then kind of you can't end up training together in the same city, and it can be a real damper. We're trying to see it in as positive a light as possible because we're both gonna, hopefully, knock on wood, end up in places that are good fits for both of us. So that's really great. I guess, what are kind of your things that you've done to prepare for the match? Did you send any letters of intent? How did you kind of approach that? I know some people, like myself, I only sent one letter of intent. Some people send a couple.
Yeah, so that's a very tricky one because so the first time I did send a letter of intent, my first try on the match, but this year I have not sent a letter of intent because I am finding conflicting information whether the program wanted if didn't want to receive emails with the letter of intent or not. There's nothing on the website. At least on interview day, the program did not mention anything about it. So I'm just like, what do I do? What do I do? So I'm still debating on that. But if a program says, do not send it, do not, by all means, do not send it because it will only hurt you at that point.
Follow what the programs say about post-interview communication. I know that Reddit often has, at the beginning of kind of interview season, I know, stay off Reddit, but they have they have a spreadsheet, usually like a Google sheet. And one of the things I did find helpful was that there was generally a program list and whether or not some programs wanted post-interview communication. Now, I'd always follow up on the program website, but it was always kind of a good guide to use, at least in PEDS. I think PEDS had a pretty good spreadsheet this year.
Yeah, so I always take it with a grain of salt because the trolls on the internet are like you don't know who to trust. I mean, after all, it's anonymous, so and you're all fighting for a spot, right? So I'm like, so, but yes, verify on the website.
Yeah, I found that at least in PEDS, because PEDS we tend to be a very kind group of people from what I've found. I'm also biased, but I found that our spreadsheet generally aligned with what the website said or what kind of communication from the programs said. So that was really helpful. I guess I'm feeling both kind of excited and anxious because, you're so excited about this next part in your life and starting your training, but then you're also anxious. Have you had those feelings?
Yes, every day it's just like, is it March already? Like, it is so nerve-wracking. Like I wanted to be March 14, right, and the 18, and then I'm like, no, you know what? No, it's better if I don't find out, but because what if I don't match? Or like, oh, it's just so conflicting.
Like match week nightmares yet?
Oh yes,
Myself.
it's just. But luckily, I keep very busy at work since we're a little bit understaffed, so we work long hours, so that keeps me off at least like 10 hours off, not thinking about the match or anything like that every day. But still, and then I get home and I'm like, oh my God, the match. I remember.
I think that's something that a lot of applicants experience is that there's this kind of fear that surrounds it.
Yeah.
So we've kind of reached the point in time where we're going to answer your questions. So if I come to go back to the top, and it's so great to see so many people joining us. Yes, the apps were very scary this year. Can we discuss what's a good number of interviews to feel confident enough to match? I know it depends how it goes, but generally, what's the consensus?
At least I believe every year it varies with the amount of applicants, the amount of competitivity with each specialty. I mean, but again, I've heard stories of people having 14 interviews not matching, people having only one interview and matching. Honestly, I don't think there's a safe number because at the end of the day, it's gonna depend on you and how well you interview and how well you were perceived by the program.
You can find data on previous matches from the NRMP, which will tell you kind of the data around per specialty, how many interviews someone had, and if they went matched or unmatched. So I remember from the NRMP data in pediatrics, if you had 14, you had something like a 99% chance of matching. But that does mean that some people who have 14 interviews will go unmatched. So it's a metric that you can use, but whether or not it's helpful to your particular situation is definitely something you should consider. And really, you only need one. Scroll down to our next question. I'm applying for anesthesiology, but I don't have US clinical experience. Can you recommend what I should do for anesthesiology?
I'm sorry, you cut off a little bit.
The question, the person is asking about applying for anesthesiology without US clinical experience, and if you kind of had experience with that or what your recommendations would be.
So when I applied to anesthesiology, I did not do away rotations or elective in anesthesiology. Like my only anesthesia exposure during my medical school was when I was doing my general surgery rotation. And because COVID hit, it was so hard to find, because and being in the OR, extra people, it was really, really hard. I mean, I will say you don't necessarily have to have the experience as long as you know how to convey your interest in anesthesia, because again, there's so many factors that go into play when you're trying to get exposure to anesthesia. But keep trying, of course, but don't let that be the reason you don't apply to anesthesia.
Kind of that goes for peds. I did get US clinical experience. I did an elective at a private clinic over the summer, and I thought that it was helpful for me. But I had other friends that had similar experiences that had really kind of nightmare experiences. So I think it's about choosing experiences that are going to be fulfilling and add to your application, if that makes any sense to folks. So now if I scroll down to more questions. Oh, sorry, this was the same question asked the second time. We've got a question about someone who has a specific step score as a non-US IMG and seeing if they can match into a particular specialty. And I guess I can start with this one. I guess what I would say is that for your USMLE scores, there's more to an application than just your score. So having an excellent score definitely helps an application, and having a poor score can hurt your application based on where you're going. But I think it's important to take into account the other factors that impact your application. Like if you've shown great improvement from step 1 to step 2, if you have US clinical experience, excellent letters of recommendation, all of these things can make up for a red flag like a poor USMLE score. Monica, would you say anything else to that, or is there anything that you'd like to add?
I agree. I mean, the people that know my story know I'm openly about my struggles in medical school and applying to residency. I don't have a great step score, not even step 1, step 2. I have attempts as well. And I always say, don't let that define you. Obviously, we got to be a little bit realistic, but try to make up for it in the other parts of your application, and don't let a number define you at where you want to be. Because I always say, why do you want to do a specialty with the end goal of matching, but you're going to be miserable? At the end of the day, that's going to affect the patient because you're going to be miserable because you study a specialty you don't want to be in the first place. So, yes, I agree.
Just said there is actually really important for a lot of people. So really, thank you so much for sharing that. And really kind of the message I think that both of us would want to convey is that you're more than whatever score you get on a test. You are going to be a well-rounded physician based on more than just your step scores. Someone says 1 more month. Yep, we're almost there. I have a countdown on my phone that says like 33 days away. It both makes me really calm and really stressed. I don't know about you.
Oh my God, I cannot count them because I'll go crazy.
So another person asks, do you think PDs take into consideration the fact that getting US clinical experience as an IMG is difficult in the COVID years?
I honestly don't know, because every program director is so different.
Yeah. So I can share my experience with this. I applied to some programs that previously would have had a 1-year US clinical experience requirement, where they waived that requirement because they understood that that's really not feasible during COVID. And then there were other programs where they didn't really care. They still wanted that 1 year of US clinical experience under your belt. And that's definitely something you should take into account when you're applying. And that's something that Match a Resident tries to keep a tally of on their platform. So kind of the answer is there really is no answer. Some do take it into account and some don't. And if there's a program you're interested in that does have a US clinical experience requirement, what I found was the best approach was to reach out to the coordinator and say, hi, my name is Tara. I am a MS4 who's applying to pediatrics this year, and I'm really interested in your program for these reasons. I've noticed on your website that you have a US clinical experience requirement. With COVID, this has been a challenge. Do you guys have any leeway in that requirement? Just opens the conversation, and it helps you determine if that's a program you should ultimately apply to based on your personal circumstance. That was my approach, at least.
Yeah, that's a good approach.
Yeah, I think if you ask the question, the worst thing you can hear is no or nothing. So
Exactly.
I say you can, as long as you're being very polite and reasonable and you're sending a well thought out email, asking a question isn't a bad thing. It shows your interest, as long as it's a genuine question. So someone else has written, the programs usually talk about thank you letters and not letters of intent. This is probably when we were discussing post-interview communication. It looks like it's not usual for them to receive letter of ranking intent. So some programs from my experience, some programs described kind of their stance around letters of intent, or what some programs called love letters. But my experience is that it was program to program specific.
Yeah. Likewise, it's program to program specific, because I've read of programs receiving a lot of letters. I've never heard of a program not knowing what it is or not receiving one. So it's very program specific as well. And the thing is with the love letters, now everybody is so scared because of everything that's happening, that they're sending, instead of sending it to one, they're sending it to two or three, and it's losing its meaning, which I think that's why some programs say they don't want to receive anything because they don't know if it's genuine or not.
Completely agree. I think the situation that I was in, because I did send a letter of intent, and I sent a letter of intent because I had a really great interview experience at my top choice, and at the end of the interview day, they said, if we're your top choice, please let us know. So that's what preempted me to let them know, because
Yeah.
they openly asked for that information. Definitely is program dependent. So we've got another question here. Can you shed some light on what options we have if we don't match? This is kind of the dreaded topic of match week. What happens if you don't match? The big ugly scary thing in the room. I know that you, Monica, have openly discussed kind of what it was like to not match last year. Do you want to talk a little bit about kind of what your experience was like, how you felt, and then what options you had afterwards?
Yes. So in my situation, since my application got withdrawn, I wasn't able to participate in the swap, which it was horrible. But if you're feeling like you're not gonna match, or you just want to have a plan B, which we all should have, because nobody is, anybody can go unmatched, is start right now, getting all your letters, getting ready to scramble, to match. And if you don't match in the swap, then you can go through the scramble. That means that after swap ends, all the programs that go unfilled, that now you can directly communicate with the programs and send your application to them. It is really hard. You need to be quick. You need to be ready. Get a buddy, get anybody that can help you, because it's gonna take two, because programs fill so quickly. So you need to be ready. And if you go through all of that like I did and still wasn't able to get anything, there's some states that you can work as a physician assistant or medical assistant. There's research you could be doing as well, and little jobs like that, which they're not the ideal, right? You want a residency spot, but it will help you stay in the medical field. It'll get you experience, and it'll give you a little income while you try again to apply to the match.
Great for me to hear about this experience, because this is something I definitely don't have experience with. And people go unmatched every year. It's kind of a fact of the system. but it's really great to hear from you and to hear your experiences. It almost makes, at least from my perspective, it makes it seem a little less scary. It makes it seem more human, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, and we have in medicine, we like feel ashamed of sharing our failures, but in the contrary, I think we should all be open to them because you'll be surprised how much and how many people are willing to help you get to where you need to be. Like when I didn't match last year, I put it on Twitter and a lot of people offered to help me to send letters to program to send my documentation because I was at work. I was like, oh my God, and I don't know all these people, but they were willing to help as long as you're honest about all your struggles and what's going on. I mean, I'm telling you, everything is a teamwork. We need each other. We need people.
IMG is hard enough. Like, we don't need to be kind of hiding our struggles from each other either. So it's really, really, at least for me, it's really inspiring to hear from you and to really hear kind of this both kind of the disappointment, but also the support that you received. Because it is more common than people think it is.
Yeah, it is.
On to our next question. Scrolling. Thank you guys all so much for kind of throwing all of your questions in. So someone asks, would you say a low score is a red flag?
Some programs consider it a red flag, some don't. Now we're moving into a more holistic view of applications, and as well I think now in January it changed, right, for pass fail the step one. So I don't know how's that gonna work now with like some people having numbers, some people having the pass fail. We will have to wait and see how that's gonna be handled.
And I would say that things that one program considers a red flag, another program wouldn't, just like Monica has said, and that there are other ways to kind of handle what a particular program might consider a red flag, whether it be kind of an improvement from your step 1 to your step 2 score, whether it be really strong personal statements and letters of recommendation, or the experience that you list on your ARIS application. So I think that there are different things that you as an applicant can do to kind of leverage the positives, all of the amazing things that make you you, so that anything that you might consider a negative, you can almost spin to work your way, if that makes any sense. I don't know,
Yeah.
Monica, if that made sense to you.
Yes. I mean, and programs sometimes like to see how you deal with that adversity because in residency you're gonna have a lot of that. So they also want to see that part of you, like, did you get through it? How did you get through it? Like, did you overcome it? They also want to see that. I mean, I'm not saying that go ahead and get that low score, but they like to see the human in you and how did you overcome it. So
It came up for me in almost every interview was, tell me about something you struggled with, or tell me about a failure you had and how you overcame it. So it's something that you can use kind of as a learning point, both for yourself and for your interviews.
for sure.
Keep scrolling to our next question. It's so great to see so many people. What about surgery for IMGs without US clinical experience? This is kind of another US clinical experience question. And I think we've covered this, but is there anything else that you want to add about, because I had US clinical experience, but it doesn't sound like you kind of got clinical experience in anesthesia. Do you have anything else that we think we should add to this topic?
Honestly, like I can only speak to the specialties I'm applying because every specialty has certain requirements. So I don't know if they're heavy on that because I also know some other specialties are heavy on research, for instance, and anesthesia not so much. So that is something that I honestly wouldn't be able to tell you.
Is that Match a Resident, they've done talks throughout the entire kind of application, interview, and now coming into match season there have been talks like these ones, and they're all saved on the Instagram feed. So there's definitely a few. I know I did one earlier, kind of talking about peds, but there's definitely been talks in the past that have talked about U.S. clinical experience. So I would look through some of those because they might be able to answer your question more effectively than we will. So I'll keep scrolling, see if we have other questions. So glad that the answers are making sense to folks. Oh, sorry, someone's asking, what is a letter of intent? So we've been kind of throwing around some terms that are kind of very frequently used in the match and we're probably really familiar with. But Monica, do you kind of want to share what a letter of intent means for you?
So that is a very good question, because with all this terminology, we can get confused. The letter of intent is the one letter that you're gonna send to your program saying, I'm gonna rank you number one, you are my top program, I love you guys, I hope like you love me back. And that's it, just to one program. And then we have the letter of interest. That's the one you send when you're trying to get an interview from certain programs. That you can send it to your, let's say, top 5 programs that you want to get an interview from. That is very important to distinguish one another.
I have some friends that have sent letters of intent where they haven't used the terms, I'm ranking you number one, where instead they've used, I loved your program, I intend on ranking you very highly. Because if you tell a program you're ranking them number one and you don't, that can come back to bite you as a match violation. So it's definitely something to be aware of. For anybody who's on here who's thinking about going through the couples match, you can send letters of interest. So I sent more than 5 letters of interest, but that's because my partner and I would send letters of interest to programs where we got interviews and the other person didn't, to try and then get the other person an interview so we could hopefully go there together. So that's another way that letters of interest are used, but they are very different from letters of intent.
Oh, yes.
Down. Someone's asking, where can someone find programs that didn't fill during SOAP? So I actually don't know the answer to this question.
So there were a lot of websites that after SOAP ended, oh my God, what was it? There were like 3 websites. I know unmatchmd.com, if I'm not mistaken, is one. On Twitter, a lot of people like to repost those spots that didn't go filled. And now with Inside the Match, I think they sometimes post programs that go unfilled. But I know there was another website. I'm gonna look for it and I'm gonna send it to Match Residents so they can post it somewhere so you guys can go and check it out. Because right now I cannot remember.
There's a lot on our minds right now, and kind of trying to remember the minutia of what happened last year. That would be really challenging. But those are really great resources. We'll send them to Match a Resident. They might link them in a comment or kind of link them in some other way for you guys. So now if I keep scrolling, asking, can we talk a little bit more about what SOAP and the scramble is like? So I know a little bit about the SOAP, but nothing about the scramble.
So with SOAP, I can only speak what I know in terms because I wasn't able to participate. So I know last year I think they added one more round. I think it's usually 3. So on match day on Monday, they let you know the first people that know that didn't match, they're gonna get the email like really early in the morning so they can start preparing to participate in the SOAP. Because I think the first round starts around 3. Like you gotta be like this because they won't even let you process that you didn't match, that you need to be applying. So, and you need to keep an open mind because once you didn't match, you have access then to the programs that went unfilled. Let's say there's psychiatry, pediatrics, surgery, and you had applied to internal medicine. Now you gotta decide if you wanna apply to one of those programs that were available, and you need to change your personal statement, try to get letters, or if you're gonna use the same letters, and then apply. They make an offer, you accept it if you or don't, and if you don't accept it, then you go to the second round, and like that. It is very like you gotta be like I'm telling you. I mean, it's horrible from what I saw. And then the scramble is when the swap ends, anything that stays open, you can go ahead and send an email directly to the program and apply with them like, oh, I'm interested in this position, here's my application. So basically you're scrambling because you're digging around to see what was left. And I think
From the scramble, oh, go ahead.
A residency swap, something like that, was called the program that let you know of the programs that went on field after match as well. I think it was.
Okay. Heard that kind of interviews for that are kind of like your regular, like more of a regular job interview.
I if I'm not mistaken, I heard it was like 15 minutes. It was like, okay, are you a good fit? Are you gonna work? Are you not? Okay, next. Because I mean, it's hard for the programs as well, because most of them know that wasn't your primary specialty you were trying to apply. So it's just, it is a little bit intense.
Wild, wild west out there. So kind of I'm scrolling to see if we have other questions coming in. So I've got somebody asking about ophthalmology residency match. Unfortunately, so ophthalmology matches outside of kind of the regular NRMP match. So I don't think I'll be able to kind of talk to what that's like. So
Me neither.
I'm so sorry that we can't answer your question. I'm sure if you kind of do a search of med Twitter is an amazing place. You'll find people from every specialty and people who are willing to answer your questions. So I would reach out to med Twitter, see if you can find somebody who can answer some of your questions. So asks who you send letters of intent to, program directors, coordinators, or both.
I said both. At least for me, I was taught that you send it to the program coordinator and CC the program director.
And to the program director, but that's because for that particular interview, I was interviewed by the program director. So I was following up with them directly. We'd already sent thank you letters to each other. So it kind of seemed like there was an open line of communication. So fingers crossed, touch wood, we'll see. What kind of violation happens if you send multiple letters of intent? So if you go to the NRMP website, they have a full list of kind of what constitutes a match violation from the applicant side and from the program side. Basically, if you were to tell a program you're ranking them number one, they rank you very highly, you don't rank them number one and you match somewhere else, the program can potentially say, hey, you acted in poor faith, that's a violation, you can potentially lose your position where you have matched. So don't tell a program you're ranking them number one unless you are ranking them number one. It's very poor form, it's very improper. So please only tell programs that you're ranking as number one, that you're ranking them number one.
I agree.
Scrolling down. Got a question asking, would it be better to apply the year you graduate or take a year, build your application, then apply the next cycle? Or at least that's how I'm interpreting the question.
I mean, it honestly gonna depend what do you have on your application, but I would say the sooner the better. Like if you are graduating that same year, apply that same year, because with every year passing, you know, chances of matching go decrease, and you don't want to risk that either.
We're beyond the window for 2021, 2022, just because kind of your applications were due in September. But as we're looking ahead to kind of 2022, 2023, if you're looking to apply this year and you're graduating in 2023, this is the time to kind of start getting everything together before you're applying. If you do plan on taking a year off, my advice, as someone who's never taken a year off, but maybe has seen some kind of upper year students above us, what they tended to do is have a very specific focus for how they were going to use that year. Whether they were going to use it for research, whether they wanted to kind of, because I go to school in Ireland, some of them wanted to do the intern year here in Ireland and then apply to the match afterwards. So I think it kind of depends on your personal situation, your application, and how you would use that year off. Down looking for some more questions. Those are all the ones that I see at the moment. So I think we'll kind of hang out for maybe 3 to 5 minutes, wait for any last minute questions to come in. But it's been really great to chat to you, Monica. It's been fantastic
Likewise.
to hear about your story.
It's okay. I don't wish it upon anybody. But yes, it was nice talking to you as well. And I know you're going to match at your number 1 program. You'll see.
We'll touch wood. We'll touch all the things. We'll cross our fingers and toes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer in kind of crossing fingers, crossing toes. There's that kind of stress that happens when you're thinking about certifying your list. So right now we're about halfway through kind of what I've been deeming in my brain as rank season, because you could submit your rank list starting February 1st, and you have to submit them by March 2nd.
Yeah.
Is it March 1st or March 2nd this year?
I think it's the 2nd, but I could be wrong as well.
At the NRMP website. But kind of there's this uncertainty that happens with when you should certify your list. And I heard this really great piece of advice, and I'm pretty sure it was on Med Twitter, or it was on TikTok. I can't remember. Med Twitter or Med Talk. But it was certify your list and don't touch it for 24 hours. If you still feel comfortable with it after 24 hours, it's probably the way that it should be. So I'll be taking that advice when I decide to certify my list.
That is a very good advice.
Is March 2nd at 9 p.m. So you heard it here. March 2nd, that's your
deadline.
That's your deadline. Sorry, someone is asking kind of one final question as we kind of decide to sign off, but this will be our last one. Is there a limit year since you've graduated to apply for a residency in the United States?
There's not a limit, but some programs do take into account how many years have passed since you graduated.
That I saw on the Match a Resident database. Now, I know it didn't apply to me because I'm graduating this year, but I saw that on the database, some programs either required or preferred if you were 3 years or less since graduation, 5 years or less since graduation, or 10 years or less since graduation.
Yeah.
Now, I've heard some programs are more flexible with that, depending on how you were using those years since graduation. Were you completing a residency in your home country? Were you using that time for kind of gaining experience? It kind of depended on how you were using those years. Yeah. Generally, from what I've heard, programs do prefer more recent graduates.
Yeah.
With that, I think we're going to be signing off. Thank you very much for joining us over the past 50 minutes. If you have more questions, feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. We'll try to answer some of them from our personal Instagram handles. Mine is at Jamieson Music, and Monica
is Burgos MD, my last name.
It's been fantastic to chat to you. It's been fantastic to hang out with you guys. And hopefully we'll see you guys in the match when everyone's kind of successfully gotten their positions. Best of luck.
Thank you, everybody. Wish you all the best of luck.